Now to other news that we're following today. The Trump administration wants action on immigration, and they're giving Congress an ultimatum. It can protect 800,000 so-called dreamers if lawmakers also adhere to a list of principles to crack down on illegal immigration. The president's plan includes constructing a border wall with Mexico, adding 10,000 immigration officers, and penalizing sanctuary cities. The guidelines came out the same day. Republican Senator Bob Corker took President Trump to task in a highly personal and public feud. What began with a spat on Twitter over political support turned into the retiring GOP senator suggesting the president treats the office like a reality show and his actions could start World War III. Correspondent Kristen Fisher is on the North Lawn tonight with two of those big stories coming out of the White House tonight. Good evening, Kristen.
Good evening, Brett. This list of demands represents a complete overhaul of U.S. immigration policy. It ranges from improving border security to beefing up enforcement, and at the very top of the list is his signature campaign promise. President Trump is telling lawmakers to fund and build his border wall, or else any deal protecting dreamers is dead. In a letter to Congress yesterday, he said that, quote, these findings outline reforms that must be included as part of any legislation addressing the status of deferred action for childhood arrivals or DACA recipients. Other reforms include stopping sanctuary cities by denying federal funding, hiring 10,000 additional ICE agents and 300 prosecutors, establishing a point-based system for green cards, and ending asylum abuse and chain migration. That's when the extended family of legal immigrants are given a smooth path into the country. The list is being praised by his base as proof of a president keeping his campaign promise. But it's being slammed by Democrats like Texas Congressman Joaquin Castro, who says it lacks basic humanity.
This proposal is a Breitbart Christmas list of anti-immigrant policies. And as many of us have said, it's a non-starter in Congress. It's dead on arrival.
It's also different from the deal the top two Democrats on Capitol Hill thought they'd struck over dinner at the White House a few weeks ago. Chuck and Nancy, as the president likes to call them, say that, quote, this proposal fails to represent any attempt at compromise. The list includes the wall, which was explicitly ruled out of the negotiations.
The message to the Dreamers is that listen to what the president says. He says he's open to a deal. So they should actually be calling their friends Chuck and Nancy to say, you know, are you going to give up this deal?
President Trump spent the Columbus Day holiday playing golf with Republican Senator Lindsey Graham just one day after picking a fight on Twitter with another Republican senator. Quote, Senator Bob Corker begged me to endorse him for re-election in Tennessee. I said no, and he dropped out. Said he could not win without my endorsement. He also wanted to be Secretary of State. I said no thanks. He's also largely responsible for the horrendous Iran deal. Corker responded by saying it's a shame the White House has become an adult daycare center. Someone obviously missed their shift this morning. The comments mark a seismic shift in the relationship between the president and a man who was once a contender to be his vice president. The chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee then told the New York Times that he believes the president's threat to other countries could put the nation, quote, on the path to World War III. He also said, quote, he concerns me. He would have to concern anyone who cares about our nation, and that the vast majority of our caucus understands what we're dealing with here. Now, Senator Corker didn't explain what exactly he meant by that, nor has President Trump responded, but the vice president just defended him by saying that he's, quote, achieving real results on the international stage while critics engage in empty rhetoric and baseless attacks. Brett.
Kristen Fisher live on the North Lawn. Kristen, thank you. ESPN is sidelining one of its anchors after a second controversial tweet. The company putting out a statement today saying it is suspending Jemele Hill for 2 weeks for violating its social media guidelines. Hill called for a boycott of Dallas Cowboys advertisers in the wake of reports that team owner Jerry Jones will bench any player who does not stand for the national anthem. Last month, Hill created uproar after she called President Trump a, quote, white supremacist on Twitter. Vice President Pence is in California this week, but it's his visit to Indiana Sunday that most people are still talking about. Vice President walked out of a football game between the Indianapolis Colts and the San Francisco 49ers after some players knelt during the national anthem. He said it was because he did not want to dignify the demonstration. Vice President's actions were also praised by President Trump on Twitter, drawing many to conclude that this was a stunt orchestrated by the administration because many in the NFL, especially on the 49ers, have been kneeling in protest for weeks.
With the information that I have, the last time he's been to a Colts game was 3 years ago. So this looks like a PR stunt to me. He knew our team has had the most players protest. He knew that we were probably going to do it again.
Senior political analyst Bret Hume joins me now with his take. Good evening, Bret. Well, I mean, there's all this talk about a stunt, but obviously the kneeling is its own kind of stunt in a way, suggests, making whatever point they want to make. But what's your take on this?
Well, I think you can take the view that says the players are performing these stunts, some of them week in and week out, and the administration, the person of Vice President Pence, have responded to that by a kind of a counter stunt. I think you can say they're both stunts, or they're neither are stunts. I don't see how anybody could seriously argue that what the players have been doing is not a stunt, and what the vice president did is a stunt. So I think any kind of sensible and balanced look at this thing would say that they're both doing the same thing. These are political actions, Bret. Both of them are political actions. The administration tonight, I guess, or the Trump team is trying to fundraise off this. This is what you expect with political acts, that they think they have a winner here, that the overwhelming majority of fans and the overwhelming majority of voters will side with the president and his vice president on this idea of respecting the national anthem, and they can fundraise off of it.
So politically, in your mind, this is a winner for the administration, despite the hackles about the trip to Indianapolis costing X amount of dollars and stepping on Peyton Manning's big night, or whatever they're saying in Indianapolis.
I'm somewhat amused by a lot of liberal critics of the vice president suddenly developed a deep concern about our budget after years in which the deficit was exploding, and now they're concerned about this. My sense about this is what happened is the vice president was going out there to his home state and his home team's event to celebrate the career of Peyton Manning, who won a Super Bowl while playing for the Indianapolis Colts, and they had an event before the game for him to honor him, and I think he was principally there for that. I have no doubt that he and the president decided ahead of time that if the players were to stage or to kneel, that he would walk out. I think it probably was planned. But, politics on both sides, seems to me.
All right, Bret, as always, thank you.
You bet.
The Trump administration takes a swipe at President Obama's landmark climate agenda by keeping a campaign promise to coal country. How he plans to do that next. Defense Secretary Jim Mattis is reiterating the U.S. military will be ready for action against North Korea if it comes to that.
So there's one thing the U.S. Army can do, and that is you have got to be ready to ensure that we have military options that our president can employ if needed.
Mattis was speaking at an Army conference here in Washington. He also recommended a book on the Korean War to remind people what war on the peninsula could look like. The Dow closed out this Monday down nearly 13. The S&P 500 was off almost 5. The Nasdaq closed down 10.5. The Trump administration is taking a swipe at President Obama's landmark climate agenda. As we said, keeping a campaign promise made to coal country. This week, the administration will begin repealing the Clean Power Plan. Environmental Protection Agency Chief Scott Pruitt made the announcement today in Kentucky alongside Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, in a move that, as you can imagine, is already infuriating critics. Correspondent Griff Jenkins has our report from Hazard, Kentucky tonight.
Tomorrow in Washington, D.C., I'll be signing a proposed rule to withdraw the so-called Clean Power Plan of the past administration. It was welcomed news in eastern Kentucky. EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt announcing the administration's proposal to repeal President Obama's signature climate regulation. There's lots of uncertainty across the country about the legality of the Clean Power Plan. Lots of questions about whether the authority is there in the Clean Air Act. And so we're going to withdraw that and move forward. Created in 2015, the Clean Power Plan, or CPP, was Obama's policy answer to reducing carbon emissions at power plants nationwide.
By 2030, carbon pollution from our power plants will be 32% lower than it was a decade ago.
But the Supreme Court stayed its implementation in 2016 after legal challenges from 27 states, led by then Attorney General of Oklahoma, Scott Pruitt. It's because they believed there was a likelihood that that was not lawful. Not everyone agrees. The Sierra Club supported this CPP and says any repeal of it will cost lives. Quote, the damage caused by Trump's willful ignorance will now have myriads of human faces because he's proposing to throw out a plan that would prevent thousands of premature deaths and tens of thousands of childhood asthma attacks every year. In coal country, Kentucky Senator and Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says the announcement is a step in the right direction.
So this is a sign of hope. It's clear, as the administrator said, the war on coal is over. It doesn't necessarily mean overnight a return to some of the years that we had a while back.
And for mining machinery company owners like John Combs, it's a chance to rebuild business.
Our company grew from 26 employees to 64. And then over the last 7 or 8 years, we're down to 23, 24 people. And the future looks bright, and we are certainly implementing the necessary steps to grow with it.
The effort to repeal CPP will almost certainly be met by new legal challenges. While here in eastern Kentucky, there were more than 15,000 coal mining jobs when President Obama took office. Today, there's less than 4,000. Brett?
Griff, thank you. Christopher Columbus becomes part of the national debate over historical monuments coming up on this Columbus Day. A look at the explorer's past that's now under fire. First years of some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. WSVN in Miami, where Miami Dolphins offensive line coach Chris Forrester resigned today after a video surfaced on social media appearing to show him snorting cocaine. The team said they have, quote, no tolerance for this behavior and accepted his resignation. Forrester said he accepts full responsibility for his actions and is seeking treatment. Fox 25 in Biloxi, where Hurricane Nate made landfall over the weekend as a Category 1. The storm surge from the Mississippi Sound littered Biloxi's main beachfront highway with debris and flooded a casino's lobby and parking structure. However, there were no storm-related deaths reported and no signs of widespread damage. And this is a live look at Oakland, California from Fox 2, our affiliate there. The big story there tonight, more than a dozen wildfires that have destroyed more than 1,500 homes and buildings in wine country. California's governor today issued a state of emergency for Napa, Sonoma, and Yuba counties due to the fires. Gusty winds have fanned the flames and smoke, forcing the evacuation of some 20,000 people, including a new evacuation of the Silverado Resort that just finished a PGA tournament last week. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back. Michigan's chief medical executive now faces a charge of involuntary manslaughter over the Flint water crisis. Dr. Eden Wells was in court for a hearing today on other charges when the announcement was made by the state's attorney general's office. 5 other people have been charged with involuntary manslaughter tied to an outbreak of Legionnaire's disease in the Flint area starting in 2014. It was the moment many critics cringed over, the video of President Trump throwing paper towels to hurricane survivors during a visit to Puerto Rico last week. Many were wondering just what the president was thinking at that moment. Well, now we know. In an interview with former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee, the president said the people loved those actions.
They had these beautiful soft towels, very good towels. And I came in and there was a crowd of a lot of people and they were screaming and they were loving everything. And I was having fun. They were having fun. They said, throw them to me, Mr. President. And so I'm doing.
The president also told Huckabee that this was just another example of the media not treating him fairly. It is Columbus Day, a national holiday here in the U.S., but one that doesn't come without controversy. Recently, statues honoring Christopher Columbus have become part of the national debate over historical monuments, as protests have defaced some of those markers around the country. Tonight, correspondent Doug McElway shows us the past of a celebrated and now targeted explorer.
The truth about Columbus is that he didn't really bring anything other than genocide and slavery and violence to indigenous people of this land, and he's not somebody who should be celebrated.
It is an increasingly common sentiment about Christopher Columbus. 4 states and 55 cities are now celebrating October 9th as Indigenous Peoples Day.
Christopher Columbus represents genocide!
New York's Columbus Circle statue remains under 24-hour guard. This fall, it was among scores of Columbus monuments across the U.S. who have been vandalized. Traditionalists see the movement as an anti-intellectual revisionist history enabled by a mob mentality.
What these organizations are doing to try to deface Columbus statues is un-American, and it's outrageous.
On college campuses, too, the pendulum has swung far to one side. The Chronicle of Higher Education reporting on Saturday that an essay entitled "The Case for Colonialism" has been withdrawn due to credible threats of personal violence to the journal's editor. No wonder that scholar William Connell, who sees both good and bad in Columbus, treads carefully when asked about revisionist history.
History's always being revised. I prefer the word correction.
Connell acknowledges Columbus enslaved the people of Hispaniola, where he first landed. Their population was also decimated by measles and smallpox carried by the Europeans.
Scholars now estimate between 50 and 90% of the population in the Americas died because of this.
But he notes indigenous people returned the unfortunate favor, infecting the Europeans with an especially virulent form of syphilis, and that indigenous people, far from being peaceful as Columbus detractors wish, were often at war with each other.
I'm a historian, so I like to preserve evidence. So I'm generally opposed to erasing our history. I'd rather have us learn about it.
That appears to be the consensus of more than 1,000 New Yorkers who signed a petition urging Mayor Bill de Blasio to preserve Columbus statues in the city. Last month, de Blasio gave a special commission until December 7th to submit recommendations of what to do with New York's Columbus statues.
No commission can undo Columbus's lasting influence. Nearly 40% of the world's Catholics live in Latin America, practicing the religion and speaking the language that Columbus first introduced there. Brett?
Happy Columbus Day. Doug, thanks. The oldest sitting senator in the U.S. Senate says she's ready to recommit and will run for re-election. California Senator Dianne Feinstein, who is 84 years old, announced her intentions today on Twitter, saying she's, quote, all in, ending months of speculation over her political future. Up next, debating the president's guidelines for immigration reform and his battle with Senator Bob Corker.
We all agreed on a framework to pass DACA protections and additional border security measures excluding the wall. While both sides agreed that the wall would not be any part of this agreement, the president made clear he intends to pursue it at a later time, and we made clear that we would continue to oppose it.
We're talking about taking care of people that were brought here, people that have done a good job and were not brought here of their own volition. But very importantly, what we want, we have to have a wall. We'll only do it if we get extreme security. If we don't have the wall, we're doing nothing.
Well, that was September 14th and 15th. Now it's October 9th, and the Trump administration releasing its immigration principles, among them funding and complete construction of the U.S.-Mexico border wall, block sanctuary cities from receiving certain federal grants, end asylum abuse and extend family chain migration, establish a point-based system for green cards, and the pushback from Democrats was reacted this way by the administration.
They should actually be calling their friends Chuck and Nancy to say, you know, are you going to give up this deal because you don't want to, why don't you want a border wall constructed? Why don't you want more immigration judges and agents? And why isn't a reasonable policy to limit chain migration? And also to stop these visa overstays and to make sure people that are flouting the law once they're here, breaking the law once they're here, go back.
So where are we on this DACA deal? Let's bring in our panel. Olivier Knox, Yahoo News Chief Washington Correspondent. Molly Hemingway, Senior Editor at The Federalist, and Guy Benson, Political Editor at townhall.com. Molly.
You know, it's so interesting how things work in this town. You have, on this issue of immigration, a true disagreement. You have people with really different ideas about how best to protect the economic interests of the country and security. And it seems like this is a great place to negotiate. You have people who really want to work out something for children who came here illegally, who are still in the country now as adults. And you have people who want to deal with border security, actual enforcement of our many immigration laws, and perhaps a change to our immigration policy so that it matches more like what Canada and Australia have in terms of merit-based. I think for most people in America, this seems like a perfect thing to go forward, work on this, everybody gives a little bit here and there, and you could actually come to a plan. And yet, I don't think people think that's what's going to happen.
So is this a negotiation? Is this something that Senator Schumer misunderstood and Minority Leader Pelosi misunderstood from their time in the Oval Office? Or what is this?
Well, obviously, Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi had an interest coming out of that meeting in the Oval Office, declaring that they had struck a deal and laying out the bill of particulars to try to lock the White House. And I think Molly's right to zero in on whether this is a negotiating tactic. In other words, are things going to fall away from this White House list of priorities as the negotiating continues, or is this hard and fast? It's not really clear to me. The president in that clip said he won't do anything unless he gets the border wall. Democrats have said we're not going to support the border wall. That doesn't really set the stage for anything better than a stalemate.
I guess what the definition of the wall is at some point will come into play.
I think so, and I'm remembering now Michael Short, a top advisor at the White House, had seemingly confirmed about a month ago that the president had taken the wall off the table as a red line demand in this negotiation. Now it appears that the demand is back on the table. So I know some people looked at this laundry list today as maybe the art of the deal, ask big and then gravitate sort of towards the middle after having moved the Overton window in your direction. The only problem with that theory in this situation is that the White House had already apparently given some big concessions, which they're now backtracking on. I think the leverage goes to the Democrats here because they're very happy to stand up to Trump vis-a-vis their base, and to say, you set this ticking clock, you said you want to help these kids, who we're happy to keep this as an active issue for us. Your move, I think that Chuck and Nancy, as he calls them, are probably pretty pleased with this development, actually.
We are coming up onto a busy legislative time where there are deadlines on a number of different fronts. One of them is the budget, and this DACA deal will factor into that.
Yeah, and also there are important things like tax reform that need to come into play here. But I don't know if I agree on the deadline issue. I think it's just as much of a problem for Democrats who really want to get something worked out on the deferred action. I mean, there is a deadline, and there will be people who, by their own statements, really need to be taken care of. And if they don't do something, it's really incumbent upon people who say it's so important to act like it's important and work. I think Americans in general are actually pretty moderate on this. They want increased security, increased border security. They want enforcement, and they also want something that can help out people who are brought here illegally as children. And so I think for a lot of people outside this town, it just seems like, why can't this be something that you could work on? And yes, a lot of people look at it as political leverage, but at some point there are actual lives here, not just for the people who are the children or the adults who were brought here illegally as children, but also everybody else who's impacted by immigration laws. And this is something that people in this town really don't think about, which is how immigration policy affects people economically, it affects their security, and this is important.
Last word, Olivia.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it's obviously a bigger problem for the DACA folks. But what's striking to me is it seemed like they had the outlines, the contours of a deal earlier on that people could more or less live with, at least at the White House and among Democrats and some Republicans. And what's striking is what Guy said is this looks, I won't, maybe not poison pills too strong, but this looks like a really very sharp shift away from that at least that notional deal.
Maybe we're seeing negotiating real time. We'll see when we come back. Thank you, panel. A fantastic shot and a phenomenal tribute to one of America's legendary musicians.